Hello and welcome to TALRadio. At TAL, we connect those who are willing to give to those who are in need. My lovely listeners and my beautiful audience, you're listening and watching to a wonderful series called Self Coaching. And whenever I say self coaching, you know who's going to be the guest of honor. It's my pleasure to welcome Andrew Talent back on Tal Radio. And people all our listeners who actually know Andrew, they know what he really does and how famous he's really with the CEOs all around the globe. And if you've just hopped in for the very first time on this very episode or probably this very podcast, well, let me introduce Andrews to you. He is a self coaching expert and has coached leaders across the globe. So, Andrew, welcome to Tal Radio.
Hi, Sandy. Nice to be here again.
Thank you so much. And this episode is really special, Andrew, because this is all about, I would say, one of the basic principles of life that is trust. So it's like establishing trust, building trust, especially with the stake key holders in our lives. So let me just start by asking you that why is trust such a crucial factor in building strong relationships?
Well, we can think about this from our own relationship, Sandy. So let's say a relationship that we're in where we don't feel trust. It means that things tend to move slowly. We're always finding our way. We're wondering whether we can actually rely on the person. So it slows things down in a relationship, which isn't always necessarily a bad thing. But if you're wanting to actually build relationships with people, it can get in the way. So trust usually for me, you can think about this in a number of ways. I think it was Stephen Covey that said in his book, The 7 Habits of Effective Leadership, it's the glue. So it's the glue of a relationship that enables when things get tough, without even saying anything, we're just there for each other. So he talks about that. So that's why it's so important. But also, it's actually about speed of us getting things done in relationships. So it's a bit like the oil in a machine where the things just move much more quickly and glide across each other because we have trust with each other in that relationship. And finally, I think it also means that it means we get things done more quickly ourselves. Because if you say to me, Sandy, I'm going to do something tomorrow and I trust you, it means I'm not going to check up on you. I'm not going to see if you've done it. I just assume it's going to be done. And then the next day I find out you've done it. So it just speeds up things between us. And also it means we have healthier relationships when we trust each other as well.
So beautifully you curated, that it's like a fuel, it's like an oil in a relationship that really needs to keep the relationship running. So that takes me to my next question, and that is like, what are some of the most common challenges that people face while trying to establish trust, especially in a professional setting, which is hard to do.
It is hard to do. Where most people make the mistake around this is we expect people to trust us without us really trying, without us doing anything to earn that trust. So we hear things like, oh, I just wish he'd trust me or she'd trust me to get on with this. And yet we've not necessarily built up that relationship with that individual. So that's where the biggest problem is. We actually expect the other people to trust us first, where what we need to do is build trust with them. The second thing is, we've talked about this in previous episodes, it may be that we focus too much on tasks and doing things rather than relying on our emotional intelligence to be able to be in relationship with people. So that's the second challenge that we tend to face. And the third one, which is probably harder for most of us, to build trust with people, we need to show vulnerability. We need to show that we don't know the answers. We need to show sometimes we don't understand. And sometimes we need to tell people that so that they can come to us and give us what we need. And we build trust that way. So the best way to build trust is vulnerability, making sure we connect in a relationship, emotional intelligence, and making sure that we actually are being more than doing.
Andre, this is a very correct thing that you said just a moment ago, that we are actually trying to complete our task, in our professional life. It's not that we are trying really hard, or forget about trying hard. We're not even trying a bit also to actually, build a trust in a relationship with the seniors or colleagues or people who are junior to us. It's very, very true. We just like want to know, okay, is this done or not? Is this done or not? All right. So moving on, is there any personal story that you can share with us, where, building trust, with the key stakeholders in this, especially professional life, really change a lot of things for them in the office setting?
Yeah, so I was working with a leader once who was newly appointed into the role. It was a very good business, had a very good team. And so they had all of the positive elements in the role, and yet they were quite a closed individual. They liked to get things done, not on their own because they could collaborate, but they didn't like to be necessarily be open and ask for help when they were struggling. And so 6 months into this particular role, they needed to engage some key stakeholders who were going to be investing in a decision this person was making. And because he'd not been really communicative with them, he hadn't been holding things back, but he hadn't been over communicative. They were very wary about whether they should invest their time and money in this opportunity because they didn't really understand enough. So he hadn't got their trust. And yet he felt he was competent, he had a great team, he had a great product, a great service, and yet they still weren't sure. So, working together with myself and also his team, he decided to become more vulnerable in the moment. And what he did, he was very open with his potential investors and asked them what it was they needed to know, asked them what they perceived the risks of being, asked them what they needed more assurance about. And because of that dialogue, and he had to be very open here and say sometimes he didn't know the answers to these questions. And actually, there were risks involved in terms of what they were doing, but they calculated them, they worked out how to manage them effectively. And just during that 2 or 3 month period where he changed his way of being and being more vulnerable, the investors felt more comfortable because they got to know the individual more effectively and then decided to invest in that opportunity. So it's a great way of, doesn't matter how good you are, how good a leader you are, how good your team is, if you're not willing to be vulnerable and share some of your concerns with your potential stakeholders, you just won't build the trust.
That's very, very true. And I mean, communication is the key, as they say. So that takes me to my next question, and that is like, what are the key elements that really contribute to trust in a professional setting, basically?
I'm going to refer some people here to look at some reading as well. So there are 3 places that you can read about this, and then we can talk about it a little bit more. So the first, we've mentioned this book in a previous episode, is a book by John Blakey, and it's called The Trusted Executive. This book is all about trust in a professional sense. And what John did, he did some really in-depth research at Aston University in the UK, working with many leaders. And what he worked out was there were 9 habits of trust that people needed to develop and work on every day to build trust with other people. And I'll go into those in a moment, but you can read about those and they're really interesting.
Ooh,
They're very difficult for us to build on as human beings. The second I've mentioned is Stephen Covey. Stephen Covey is unfortunately no longer with us, but he wrote some great books. And he actually wrote a book, I think it was called The Speed of Trust. And what was great about that book is he talked about all the way through again about how your relationships, your professional life can just actually move more quickly if you have the trust within your relationship. And he talks particularly about being courageous. So that's about how you are in relationship, being bold in decision making, being vulnerable, which we've talked about before. And the other important thing is actually this presence again, which we've talked about in previous episodes. So there's the 3 that he talked about. And then the third element is in my book, Self-Coaching for Leaders, where there's a whole episode of trust in there. And what's interesting about that piece is I talk in that book about us building a trust stakeholder map. And so what that looks like, if you imagine on a big piece of paper, you at the center of the paper in a circle, and then all of the relationships you have around you in a little stakeholder map about where your trust is at the moment with them. So the further away the person is from you, the least trust you have. The closer they are, the more trust you have. And you can build up a lovely map to actually work out exactly where you are in relationship with them. Would you like me to share John's 9 habits? Put my glasses on for this one. So he talks about us coaching in relationship. He talks about being consistent, so there are no surprises in relationship. He talks about being honest. How many times are we told little white lies where we think they're okay, but actually it's about being honest? Different to that, he talks about being open. So that's about being transparent. Going back to my example I gave, he talks about humility, being humble. So not knowing all the answers and recognizing other people have the answers sometimes. I love this next one, and it's a word called evangelize. So it means tell the world about what it is that you're doing and build trust in that way. So he believes evangelizing his word is useful. Courage is the next one he has, which shares with Stephen Covey. Really interesting, this one, and we should do it more with ourselves when we're trying to trust ourselves, is being kind. That's very important when building trust with other people. And the final one he has, which is a very normal one, is about delivering. So doing what we say we're going to do. And that's really important. So all of those 9 habits you can read more about in John's book. But if we build those in terms of who we are as a person, we're more likely to build trust.
When you were talking about these night habits, I still remember. I think these are basic fundamentals, whenever the child is growing and, parents always start, engraving these things in the child. But as we grow, I'm not sure why we move away from these basic principles.
Yeah,
And it
I
happens
think
all across the globe,
it
actually.
does. It does. And one of those reasons we talked about a little bit in the past is other people in relationship trigger them in us. So for some reason, somebody who's maybe a little bit authoritative or somebody who's very intimidating, we won't want to necessarily tell them that we don't know the answer because that's how it's making us feel. So it's how we are in relationships and how we're triggered, which is a lot of the reasons why we lose these lovely elements of how we are as a human.
True. Great to know all this, 9 basic principles of trust,
Sure.
I would say. So moving on, Andy, could you just describe to us, like, how trust really differs, between internal stakeholders? When I talk about internal stakeholders, I'm referring to our team members, our colleagues, and maybe the clients, the partners. Yeah,
Sure. So if we just talk about some of those habits for the internal, we have two elements. We have self. So if I say to myself, I'm going to make sure I eat healthily today, and then I don't, then in terms of the trust I have in myself, it's diminished a little bit. There's a lovely story that Stephen Covey talks about in his book about the trust bank. And every time that we actually lose trust in something, ourselves or someone else, that bank deposit goes down and goes down and goes down until we have very little deposit in the bank. And it's very difficult to get people to do things for us. Whereas if we deliver and do the things we say we're going to do for ourselves, we actually feel better about ourselves and about the relationship. So that's the first thing. With internal relationships with our teams, we're with our teams every day, whether that's remote or face to face. And therefore, it's all about how we behave with each other in terms of doing the things we say we're going to do on a daily basis, being kind to each other, and having those conversations where we don't know something, we say it, we just don't know. Can I have your opinion? Can you give me your view on this? So that's how we build internally. And then with wider stakeholders in terms of our network internally, that's about giving them what they need to know at the right time because they don't see us every single day. They see us maybe once a month, once a year.
true.
So it's going back to what is it they need to have confidence in us.
I really liked, Andrew, when you said trust bank, when you use this word. And the only thing that came to my mind is we don't need Swiss bank in this
No.
world. We need a trust
We
bank.
do need a trust bank. And this is just a simple one. So, for example, even at home here, let's say I am wanting to make sure my relationship at home is good, and I say, "Look, I know you don't like doing this job, so I will take the rubbish out, the bin bags, the every single night to the can outside, the bin, and I will do that." And then I don't do it, and so therefore, then somebody else in the family does it, and
Mm.
suddenly my trust goes down again. So the next time I say I'm going to do it, they don't trust the fact I'm going to do it and they just do it themselves. So again, it just slows things down in terms of relationships and getting things done. If I am the one letting people down, and we all do it, it's about how
We
we have
all
that
do
discipline.
it.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
very true. And in the end, we all shout like, why the hell don't you trust me?
Exactly.
It
Exactly.
boils down to that.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's move on. Really nice conversation that we are
Yeah. Yeah.
hearing, we are actually having, and I'm sure our listeners are really enjoying it, and our
Yeah.
viewers also are enjoying it. So moving on, what are the early signs or warning that you can really make out, okay, there is a certain kind of a trust deficit that is building upon now.
So some really interesting indicators here. When we ask for help and nobody replies. So that's really interesting because it means that people have maybe lost confidence in us or trust in us, that if they were to help us, we'd do something with it. So sometimes silence from responses around us when we ask for help is a really good indicator that maybe the trust is not there. The second is when we used to do jobs or we're asked to do jobs and we're not asked to do them anymore. So it might be somebody, my manager asked me to do a particular job which is quite responsible, and yet maybe I didn't deliver on it or I didn't do it on time. And so I've not been asked again. So I've lost trust in that way. So sometimes absence of projects or tasks in workplace can give you a good indication. And also, if we find ourselves blaming other things around us about why our life is not as it should be, that's also a good indicator that maybe we've lost trust somewhere because it means that something's not happening in our relationships. And what we're choosing to do is blame somebody else. It's somebody else's fault. Whereas really, it's probably the fact that we've not actually delivered on one of our commitments to other people. So there's some early signs that maybe we're losing trust.
Well, people is listening to us at the moment, please do check in with it yourself. If you are having,
Absolutely.
if you're facing such an issue, then you need to start building the
Mhm.
trust again. Moving on, I would really like to know that, when we talk about leaders, so what can leaders really do to foster a culture of trust within the organization, especially between the team members?
Yeah. So there's a few ways that you can look at this. Some people like to do it scientifically and do it with a little bit of data. So what you can do is look at those 9 habits of trust we talked about through John Blakey's model. And you can put a very, very simple questionnaire together using AI or how you want to do it, just to get some feedback from your team and the wider employees in the organization about where they feel they're strong in building trust and maybe where they need some help in building trust. And if you've got that among 6 to 12 people at least, you get a really good sense of where your level of trust is within the actual team at the moment. Have an open discussion about that, work out how you can actually help each other to build those areas. And it can be quite a nice collective fun exercise to do that. The second thing, which is harder for people to do, and it goes back to something you just said in about a couple of minutes ago, is actually asking other people in the team how I can build trust with you. So what do I need to do to make sure that you trust me more? And that's a really interesting question because sometimes the answer that comes back is not one we want to hear. It might be, well, could you turn up on time at meetings? Because that would really help me because I know I'm not being late. And that's almost seen as a criticism sometimes, but we've got to ask for this kind of stuff. So feedback is the second way. And then the third way is really, again, in the everyday interactions with people, it's trying to make sure we don't commit to too much. So when I'm working with my team, me saying I'm going to do something tomorrow, I do it, and then they see I do it, and then I confirm, was it done in the right way? Did you get it in the right time? It just builds trust again. So a lot of this is about reliability with the team. But I think that initial exercise to really explore what's going on for all of us in the team and understand where trust is in place at the moment, where it isn't, is a really useful exercise.
Right. So this is about the leaders, but when we talk about in personal life as such also, once the trust is broken, how can we rebuild it? Is there a way to rebuild it first of all? And if yes, then what it is?
This is going to be very hard for some people. It's hard for me. The first thing I would suggest is that whoever we've had the trust broken with, we've got to re-engage with an apology. So it's about recognizing and accepting that we've made a mistake or we haven't done something we said we were going to do and apologize. So whether that's over a voice message, whether it's over an email, ideally face to face, just say, look, hands up. I know I said I'd do this for you. I didn't do it. These were the reasons why. I really apologize. I'm hoping that we can get our relationship back to where it was because I want to do that. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would suggest around personal relationships is actually not taking too much on. I think in personal relationships, we're so busy in our lives, and it's very easy for us to say yes to things. So just sense to ourselves, what's my capacity like tomorrow to take something on like a dog walk or to help somebody out? And rather than me just say yes because I want to be helpful, just really contemplate whether I can do it now. And if I can't, if I cannot do it today, maybe find another day that I can help that person with. And if it's not me, it might be somebody else, so I can recommend somebody else. So that's the second way. So to rebuild. And third thing is to recognize again that we need to rebuild the trust ourselves. So this goes back to the earlier point, whether it's professional or personal, being vulnerable to say why we might be struggling to do the things in our relationships that we said we're going to do, and be very open and honest about that and say what we're struggling with, what we might need help with, how they can help us in that sense. And it's really important because when we do that, it instills in the other person in our relationship that they do want to help us. But if we're saying, oh, no, I'm fine, and yes, I can do it tomorrow, and then again, we make the same mistake, that's a really good way to erode trust and the trust bank goes down again. So it's never easy, but they're the things I would suggest.
There's something that really is bothering me. But like whenever we're talking about trust, it always bothers me. Like, is it something like age related also? Like whenever we see kids or something, they easily trust everybody around
Mhm.
them. But the moment we grow up, we meet people, things happen in life. Somehow it is an inbuilt thing which comes in us also automatically that we tend to cease basically, trusting others. So is it something related to age also? I mean, I don't know. It's just a question that I don't
Yeah,
know
it's a
whether
great
to have
question.
an answer.
I think it's a really good point, and I would say it's probably less about age, but I think it's about experience in life. So, for example, you could have a 25-year-old who's listening to this, who's had so much experience in life and been let down so many times and has been through some very traumatic events where it's very difficult for them to trust. And yet you could have a 50-year-old person who actually for 40 years, they've had a lot of trust in all of their relationships. And suddenly in the last 10, maybe somebody went behind their back or lied to them. And it's been very difficult to get back that trust again. And yet it's probably a little bit easier for them because they've had 40 years of lots of trust in the bank. So I think it's less about age. I think it's about the experiences we have, what happens to us, and our loss of faith in humanity and relationships sometimes when that trust is broken. So what we could do and should do, obviously, which we talked about in the past and we'll talk about in future podcasts, is if we come into the present moment right now and let go of all that's in the past, we have that ability to trust in the moment right now in terms of what we feel in the relationship, what's going on for us right now, and judge that person in the moment as opposed to everything that's happened to us because that's gone now. But yeah, you're right, it does happen to us all.
And so, on that wonderful note, because it happens to us all, well, our audience can certainly trust us because we will be back with another episode on this wonderful series called Self Coaching. So, Andrew, thank you so much for being on Tal Radio, and thanks a lot for enlightening our audience, basically, I would say.
Been a pleasure. Thanks, Sandy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and thanks a ton to our lovely audience who's been listening and watching to us all this while. Thank you, and have a great day ahead.